Dear friends, it is the closing session, and what a closing session. I don't remember in my life having the opportunity to be sitting on stage with 5 heads of states, so it's an immense privilege for me. And since you know they don't need any presentation, we will almost be speaking between English and Spanish. Unfortunately, despite having a wonderful wife who speaks perfect Spanish, I still didn't learn Spanish. But I will try to jump. But we are almost at the end. We have these amazing 5 influential leaders from across Latin America. They all have shaped their individual countries and their region. So I will go directly to the point by not really going too much in details about their respective bios. Let's, if you agree, Your Excellencies, have a very open conversation, very frank. I will not say we are with Chatham House rules, but let's consider we have. And what I realize, having the privilege to work and to advise many heads of state in my life, you are much more free of speech after you leave power than when you are at the office. So let's have these rules and speak very frankly. So my first question is called what if? What if means if you are back to power and if you are back, if you were back to being president, what would you do differently while you were president? So I will start one by one. If you are back at the old time, what would you do differently, President Calderon?
Well, honestly, we the politicians, we don't like to say, I would do different things, but I did. One is, I would take probably much more risk, political risk. I was a president without majority in Congress. I was a president in absolute minority regarding the local governments in Mexico, the states. And I would take much more risk in order to push the governors to transform their own structures, in particular to rebuild legal law enforcement institutions, police corps, fiscal attorney offices. Basically, some of them, or very much of them, they didn't do their job. And I will, if I were there again, thank God that's impossible in Mexico, and I hope that we'll keep like that. But probably I would take much more risk in order to move the agenda, to get across it. But anyway.
Prince Chinchilla, what would you?
Well, having had the honor of being the first female president at that time, you know, the impact that my election had on girls and young ladies was really impressive. I will never forget when I visited some schools and high schools after my election, and most of the professors and teachers told me that the day after my election, most of the girls arrived to the schools and the high schools saying that they were also going to be presidents of the country. But the problem is that sometimes when we arrive for the first time, women leaders, we do not really understand that we are going to be judged differently than men. So for example, whenever I made an error, which is very common, you know, among us leaders, we are human beings, and whenever I had a kind of error, they went to the people, the pollsters, to ask the people if they will vote again for a female president. And they had never asked that when the error was made by a man. So I think that if I will have the opportunity to do it again, I will invest much more on a different kind of communication, because in a certain way, we need to educate people about how is this to be a leader, you know, being at the same time a female. Basically that.
Prince Fernández.
Bueno, muchas gracias primero por la invitación.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in Rio de Janeiro. hadn't come here for a long time.
estar en el Brasil de Lula.
Happy to be in Lula's Brazil, that I admire so much, President Lula. And
Hoy a la mañana un periodista
this
me hizo una
morning,
pregunta
a
parecida.
journalist has asked me a very similar question, and my answer was that if I had to think about,
Diría yo, a mí me encantaría
I
cambiar
would
el
love
tiempo
to
que me
change
tocó gobernar.
sort of time.
Me tocó gobernar un tiempo
I
una Argentina muy endeudada,
governed a country that was deeply in debt,
en pandemia como
in
todo el mundo.
a pandemic like everybody, the rest of the world, and that had to withstand the Russian-Ukraine war effects, and that had the worst drought in the last 10 hours, that we lost $5 billion. And so
Si yo volviera,
if I went back
si yo tuviera ahora la oportunidad de gobernar,
to the opportunity to be an opportunity that has record harvest right now, what I would do is trying to take care of the biggest problem, which is inequality in our country.
pondría todo mi
I would put all my energy,
ahora que te damos mejores
now that the conditions are much better, to improve people's income, to ensure internal consumption in a country that consumes about 70% of what they produce. I would absolutely do the opposite of what is being done at the moment, being honest.
y creo que allí
And I think that that's where the central debt that Argentinian politics in general, and democracy in general, that's we're not going to solve in 40 years of life.
que objetivamente
What objectively was a problem in Argentina, which is the poverty in general. We have not been able to take care of it. Not only that, but it's been deeper, and it's really, really concerning. So I think that's where we should focus on and maintain in a time when the globe and the global right has been globalized, to maintain
los principios del
the
progresismo,
progressive principles.
lo que acaba de decir Laura,
What Laura has just said. The truth is that
seguir garantizando los
continue to assure women's rights, equality of gender, and gender diversity, respect to diversity. That's something that we should not renege. On the contrary, we should work every day, every society, and something that I insist
en gran medida
needs to be,
esta agenda es una agenda
and some people think that this is not important. This is a central topic, because a society that does not revindicate
es una sociedad
equality
destinada al
is not destined for success.
fíjate, Laura, que ahora no te pregunto
Laura, you're not going to be asked about what did you fail in. Everybody has here. This shows the advancement of women's rights, which I believe in, something that I believe in deeply.
President
Thank you.
Santos.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm honored to be here among such good friends. When I became president for the first time, I copied what Abraham Lincoln did when he became president: invite my former rivals to become part of my government. And they all became ministers, part of my cabinet, so I had a very ample majority in Congress for the 8 years of my administration, 4 years, and I was reelected, and I had approved, and the majority in Congress allowed me to have the reforms that I wanted. But I made a very crucial mistake. Maybe I was overconfident, I was believing in the polls, and I put the most important policy of my government, which was to make peace with the FARC and end a 50-year war. I decided to put it to a referendum. And I underestimated the power of fake news. And I was overconfident because all the polls said, well, you're going to win by far, and I lost. And so if I had to go back, I would follow the advice that many people gave me, and that is, don't risk everything on a referendum, because public opinion is easily manipulated. And that happened there. Fortunately, the peace process then went to Congress, where I had a big majority and was approved. But that was a big, big mistake that I had, and I I had a conversation with Desmond Cameron because Brexit more or less was at the same time, and I think he has the same view about referendums.
But we learned from mistake, Mr. President, and it helped you to make peace. And congratulations for your Peace Nobel Prize, Mr. President. President Quiroga.
Thank you, Richard. I'll begin by thanking you and Cecilia for having accomplished this beautiful event or having brought us here. It's very difficult to get Latin Americans to go to the Gulf states or to Saudi Arabia, and lo and behold, you have brought Saudi Arabia to beautiful Brazil and Copacabana, and that's a good first step. The last step, Richard, should be to bring him to the original Copacabana, which is the one, Virgen de Copacabana, by Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. That's where the name came from, by the way. So you're close, you're close. I'm the only one here that jogged this morning in Copacabana Beach, and I'll be Saturday near the Copacabana in Bolivia. What would we do different? I think the main thing is when you're endowed with natural resources, to explain to people that natural gas does not rain down on you, that oil does not come with a storm, that pipelines don't just sprout off the ground, that to develop my country and make it the natural gas hub of South America took a lot of work. We had to write off a lot of debt, bring in a lot of private investment, change legislation, build the pipeline to Brazil to be intertwined energetically for a long time. And we were so busy doing that, the people took it for granted, and they thought, no, just the gas just rains. Well, it turns out reserves have been depleted. Now we're out of gas. Now we have foreign currency problems. And I think it is key when you have natural resources to make sure you explain the framework that has allowed you to develop those. And in particular, and I'll close with this, to be thankful to the ones that made it happen. We're here in Brazil. To me, the greatest South American of the last 35 years is Fernando Enrique Cardoso. He made a personal bet to integrate Bolivia and Brazil that were living back to back with a pipeline that changed dramatically the economy of my country and changed the way we relate to Brazil, and also made us cheer for Brazil in the World Cup because we wanted more Brazilians watching TV for longer periods of time using Bolivian natural gas.
Thank you. You are leaders. And we all agreed when we were talking about this session, there is a big crisis of leadership today. And it's not new. I would like to hear again from each of you, what is your definition of leadership? And how can we bring back trust in leaders? These investment conferences are always about trust in business. And we always say investment is built on trust. But many people lost trust in politics and politicians. I would like to hear from you. I don't know who wants to start, whatever, maybe you had great opinions, so ladies first. Can you tell us what you think about this crisis of leadership and how can we bring back trust in politics and leadership?
Well, thinking about Latin America, although this is a global problem right now, not only people are losing faith in leadership, but most importantly, they are losing faith on democratic institutions. So I think there are 2 or 3 things that we should do. One is try to think about democracy not only as a set of rules that we must follow, because those rules counts for taking decisions, but also as a system that has to deliver, that has to be able to resolve and to respond to citizens' demand. And sometimes I would say that we do not do our maximum to try to satisfy some of people's needs and demands. Secondly, we need to open more spaces for people's participation. Here in Latin America is very interesting because when you look at the polls, the Latino Barometer, which is the most serious one, you can compare from one country to another. What the people are telling us is that they are voting. Yes, Latin Americans love to go to the polls. But more and more, people are responding, I like to vote, but also I am protesting. So that means I am going out to express my voice. So I think that people realize that there is political life between one election and the other. So we need to go beyond the democratic kind of, the electoral democracy and move towards more participatory democracy, open spaces in the institutions, and try to encourage the youth to play a more protagonist role.
President Calderon, you want to react on that?
Yes, one is, I remember that I had the opportunity to organize and chair a G20, the first in Latin America. And I remember the presence of very great leaders at the time. So Angela Merkel, for instance, or Barack Obama, President Santos was there, President Piñera, rest in peace, he was there. A lot of people, Gordon Brown. But the point is, now, when I see this society everywhere is not only the lack of leadership, but what is important, very concerning, is the going down quickly about politics, politician, etc. So I need to go back to when I was young, to remember my father, a utopian, fighting in the opposition in a very autocratic regime. And what I used to see in my father, he was a man with ideas, a man with ideal congressman, able not only to dream in something, but fight for that dream. And he used to say that politics is too important. We cannot let politics to the politician. We, the citizens, need to be the politicians. And my advice is, all of you, you are leaders, probably in business, society, culture, whatever. Be your own politician. Be your own leader in your country. Politics is not for politicians. Politics is for citizens. And politics coming from the Greek polit, which is city, and from the Latin civitas, which is city as well, are synonymous. But here in Latin America and the world, you can see politicians for one side, citizens for the other. We need to match them, and the crucial idea is to be commitment, to have ideals, to believe that your country and the world could be different, and fight for that, and maybe we can recover leadership somewhere.
President Fernández, do you want to react on that after President Santos?
No, solo puedo compartir con
I
las
can only
que se han dicho.
share, agree with everything that was said, but I want to reflect on something.
Todos lo que estamos viendo
Everything that we're seeing is that there is a crisis with politics, not with the leadership.
que hay una crisis
And there is
con
a
los valores democráticos.
crisis with democratic values, not with the leadership.
Y nadie se
And
pregunta por qué.
nobody's asking why this crisis is happening.
Y yo creo que tiene
And I think that there is an explanation.
inexplicablemente
Unexplainably,
política no aborda.
inexplicably, politics says that the social psychology has been transformed by pandemics. And so if we're going to talk about the global south, we have seen social injustice in the world. We have seen everything. And then we found out that the production of vaccine was concentrated in the sort of developed world, that they kept 90% of the vaccines, and the 10% remaining was distributed in the rest of the world, the global south, which led a lot of people to sort of discredit the system. We were sort of felt neglected by the system. And so this also takes to that 11 people own 40% of the GDP, the global GDP, including global funds, of course. So they own 40% of the world, basically. Do you think that the average citizen cannot react when he sees this kind of injustice? Because when you see the proportion of deaths between the global north and global south in the pandemic, you can see how unfair the income is distributed around the world. And I think that obviously this generated a growth of the despair in society and just people not wanting to get involved. And we see this is a crisis of leadership. It's not just leadership. It's mainly a crisis of social believability of democracy. And that's why what fails here are these elements that are unexpected in politics, that express the idea to destroy the institutionality.
Eso es lo que aparece.
That is what comes.
Y este problema,
And
para los que
that
queremos
problem
Estado de Derecho, para
for
los que
us
queremos la
who
democracia,
want
para los que
democracy and who
valoramos
want
la
the state of
república,
rights and
debe ser
value the
lo que
republic
nos debe convocar. Con la
should be
fuerza
the thing that summons
que
us.
hablaba el presidente
Like President
Calderón.
Calderon was
Con esa
saying,
fuerza.
with that exact force and power, because that's where
Punto donde tenemos
where
que trabajar.
we need to work on.
¿Cómo le hablamos
How do we
a ese
talk
mundo
to
descreído
this sort of
con razón,
world
porque
in
ha
disbelief that is in
descubierto
disbelief correctly because they have discovered
We
the
cannot
inequalities
agree
in the
more.
world?
This is why
We
we
couldn't
sent
agree.
this strong message for the past 2 days of invest in dignity. And to add to your point, I've spent a lot of time in Africa where I was born, and only 12% of African people got the vaccine during COVID, 12%. President Santos, please.
Well, I had a very unique experience of having to be a leader in war and then making peace. And that requires two different kinds of leadership. Making war, it's a sort of vertical type of leadership. You give orders, you have a strategy, you rally the forces around you, and as long as you win, you're okay. But then making peace, you have a completely different type of leadership. You need to persuade, you need to convince, you need to have empathy to teach or convince somebody to forgive, and that is much more difficult. So making peace is much more difficult than making war. However, in both cases, you need to have a long-term view. What is the world lacking today is long-term leadership. Leaders who are worried about the next election, the response to any of their decisions, and the problems that we have in Latin America or in the world need long-term leadership, however unpopular that one might be. You have to be able to have the courage to take unpopular decisions. And at the end, people will respect you. My experience, I was Minister of Finance in 2001, 2002. I had to approve in Congress the most unpopular decisions. I was the most unpopular Colombian citizen in 2002. They said, you committed political suicide. But I was elected some years afterwards with the highest percentage in the history of Colombia, because people realized that what I told them, that this is necessary, even though it is very difficult to swallow, was the correct recipe. This is what the world needs today, leaders with long-term view.
And political courage, probably. President Quiroga.
Thank you, Richard. Two quick points. One is the social media world has compressed everything. It used to be true that in politics you get evaluated every 4 or 5 years, however long the cycle was for Congress or presidency. And soccer team coaches got evaluated every Sunday, once a week. Now with social media, is every 30 seconds you're being evaluated. So it's compressed the cycle. It's natural. But the second point is, to me, there's a vacuum of leadership because of the structural changes in the world. A long time ago, a meeting like today, not this one, the one in Italy, the G7, we were all clinging to wait and see what happened in trade or debt or development. It is becoming less and less relevant because to South America, what matters most are the trans-Pacific links to Asia and China. For capital flows, the trans-South Atlantic links to the Gulf states matter more and more. So since we're going to be at the G20 here in Brazil, I would hope that we take the opportunity, I say we as the Global South, or whatever term you want to use, to say when it comes to trade, we're not waiting anymore. The US Congress is closed for trade business. That's the hard, cold reality. It has nothing to do with Trump. It is the Congress. Europe, South America, and everybody knows it well, we've been negotiating Mercosur with Europe, the longest dating trade game in the history of the planet, 25 years, and no wedding ring, and no wedding bells. It's not going to happen. So I would use the G20 here in Brazil to have Gulf states sign trade agreements with South American countries, to have Asian countries, India, China, sign trade agreements with South America, because the world has changed dramatically. I would do the same thing on finance. I would do the same thing on the digital sphere. And to me, the example that was used was the greatest failure of the UN Security Council. All 5 veto-wielding members had their own vaccine to be produced. I thought that is the one issue where they will come together to arrange how we distribute the vaccines. And then lo and behold, we got vaccine nationalism, and it all failed. And my last point here would be, using this forum, not the G7 in Italy, G7 is convened there. Why don't Brazil, Saudi Arabia, China, India do a G13 and develop our agenda, and then seize the space that the leadership vacuum from the traditional West is creating?
You were talking about the Gulf countries. With many friends here are from the Gulf, and you know the Institute was born in Riyadh. We need to be a little bit educated. I think we are making a lot of confusion about Latin America as we do about Africa. Many people are talking about Africa like if it was one single country, while we have 54 countries. Could you please help us to understand what are the differences between your different countries? If I am an investor, where should I put my money? In all countries, in each countries? How would you help to have a better understanding about your different countries? President Calderon, please. Mexico.
Well, Latin America, in general, we like to dream about our natural resources, and raw materials are our savior. There was a time in which we were talking about oil, and then we were talking about, now we're talking about lithium and things like that. I don't believe that the future of development depends or relies on natural resources, honestly. Not in religion, not question of race, not the real future of progress, the real future of nations relies on rule of law, and we need to learn that lesson everywhere. It's not about natural resources, it's not about the size of the territory, it's not about the things. The thing is, we need to understand development can come only through real rule of law, and that will be the lesson for me in Latin America in general. It's the pending issue, and we can build that. Now, let me go into Mexico, because we are still far away from that, the rule of law. But what we try to make different is, yes, we have oil. We are the first producer of silver in the world, and the second or third in gold. But the thing for us was to bet in aggregated value, and we switched from only raw materials and natural resources all the way to manufacturers. And we decided to open up borders. We decided to reduce tariffs to zero, for instance, in automotive industry. We decided to bet in joint education and for engineers. In that sense, of course, in free trade agreements and in freedom, and that made Mexico a champion, an engineer. Mexico, for instance, is exporting more than 60% of all the manufacturers of Latin America. So more in Mexico than the rest of the world. We are exporting $1.5 billion a day, mainly in manufacturers, much more than oil, much more than something else. And that is producing an incredible aggregated value and new jobs and a huge potential. So Mexico is a real machine for the future in terms that we are, when I took office, for instance, we are the 9th largest exporter of vehicles in the world. When I left office, we were the 4th largest. We are the 2nd exporter of flat screen, the 4th in medical devices. So there is future. We can lose the future, but we have a great chances. And I think Latin America has different advantages depending on the country, but that a piece of what Mexico in my dream and my beliefs, and there is a big chance to invest. So take the money to Mexico, and of course, in addition to Brazil.
Costa Rica, what many people are calling the Switzerland of Latin America.
We are better than Switzerland. I would like to take these questions, to take the opportunity, now that you asked about my country, to speak about the small countries in our region. Because in certain way, we cannot afford to take some decisions that have been taken by the largest countries of Latin America. For example, we need to be open economies. And when you analyze what are the combinations, the right combination of factors in those small countries that have been able to succeed, you have basically three ingredients. The first is human capital. Investing in human capital is really critical. Let me tell you, my country banned, many years ago, we banned oil and gas exploitation. We banned, during my government, gold exploitation. So we eliminated almost all the extractive industries. But we have been able to grow in a very good rate, understanding that the most important asset is human capital. The second issue is the quality of the institutions, and that has to do with the rule of law, of course. You need to have predictable rules for investors to go to your country. But in general, that is very important. So rule of law is something that you find in those countries that have been able to succeed. And finally, open economies. It is interesting to see that the most open economies in Latin America are those from Central America and the Caribbean. If you have those three ingredients, let me tell you that you can even have bad leadership, but the nation will move forward.
Thank you. President Fernández, Argentina, above the World Cup champion. What else?
A ver, primer punto.
First point is
América Latina,
Latin America is not one,
porque América Latina
because
empieza en México
Latin
y
America
termina
starts
en
in
Argentina,
Mexico and it ends in Argentina,
pero hay realidades
but
de todas
there are
maneras.
very different realities.
México
In Mexico,
es parte de la América
it's
Latina,
part of
pero no
Latin
es parte
America,
de
but they
América
are not part
Central
of Central America and South America
todo su
because
desarrollo comercial
all of
se
their
funda
commercial basis and development is in a region that is NAFTA, and they are allied with the United States and Canada, which gives us a strength that we don't have in the global South.
La América Central,
Also, Central America and
está
Caribbean
formada por países
has
insulares, países muy pequeños,
island countries, very small countries,
con otras
with
capacidades de
different
desarrollo.
capacities for
Yo quisiera tener la
development. I
capacidad
wanted to
turística
have
con la
the
belleza
touristic
turística que
and the
tiene
beauty that you
Costa
have,
Rica,
for
que
example,
siempre
in
es un país que
Costa
recomiendo
Rica,
conocer de
that
Centroamérica,
is the
por la
most beautiful
belleza que
country
tiene.
in Central America.
Y
It's
después la América
incredible.
del Sur, que
And
tiene
then
ese
South
gran motor
America
que
that has
es
this major
Brasil,
engine that is
tiene
Brazil,
su socio
and
histórico, que es
their
Argentina.
historical partners,
Entre los dos,
Argentina, and among
conforman mucho
both
más
of
que la
them
mitad
have more than
del
half of the
sudamericano.
GDP of South
Ahora,
America. And
después de la pandemia
after the pandemics and the war that Russia invaded Ukraine,
hay una demanda clara
there is a clear demand for two specific things in the world:
de alimentos y de
food
energía.
and energy.
Y si hay algo que
And if there's something that we can do in South America is producing food and produce energy. So think about this.
el gran desarrollo que se
If
ve
the great development that is coming is in the electric vehicles, Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina, we have 66% of the lithium of the world.
ahora lo que debemos hacer es poner
What we have to do is to end the extractivism, historical extractivism that we have suffered in Latin America. And then I can share with Felipe what we say, that we cannot only export prime matters or resources. We need to go. In the last meeting we in the European Union, we have moved forward because they have committed to work about that when they define extractivism, and to start thinking about how to add value to the resources extracted from our lands and from our mountains
que nuestros países brindan.
that we're blessed with in our countries. And I remember that in the conference, the press conference that we had with Michelle, with Orion, I was remembering that in South America, costed 500 years to convince Europe that we had to be independent countries, but we were able to. And what we need to do in order to ensure that this primary production is incorporated with value is to give our societies from what is really the differential between our societies in terms of being better than one another. Is it having oil? Is it having copper? Is it having lithium? No, it's having intelligence. Investing in knowledge is the best that a state can do in this moment. Because take a look, for example, at the African case. Countries that are swimming in rivers of oil, but they don't have the technology to extract it, and that's where they lose fortunes. The development of science and technology is central for Latin America. Central. Because otherwise we're not going to be able to ask other people to come here to add value to our product if we don't develop our science and our technology. And in that point, Laura is very right when she says that we have the human capital capable of doing so. Argentina is one of the 10 countries that put satellites into orbits, and they produce the satellites and they build the satellites in Argentina. And now we are building the first propelling rocket. We are not even going to have to rent rockets to take these satellites to the stratosphere. That is the secret that we have. We have the resources, the natural resources, but the secret is the added value. Added value. And we have to be open to the world. Clearly, the investors that come to our country generate jobs, generate work, and everything else. The capital that we need to be sympathized to, and we know that it's a connecting bond, but the investments that are made in our country, that is the major challenge that we have.
Colombia.
So
many perceptions about Colombia.
I'll do my sales pitch. Colombia, after the U.S., is the oldest democracy in America. Why is that? Because since our independence, the rule of law has been extremely important. Our two founding fathers, one is Simón Bolívar with the sword, and the other one was Santander with the laws. He said, the sword will give you independence, the laws will give you freedom. And that has, in a way, that became part of our core.
The DNA.
Today, I think that is more needed. Like you all have said, right now we need respect for institutions, respect for the rule of law. To attract investment, you need certain kind of certainty. And unfortunately, in Latin America, we have not had that as in other countries. Colombia is in an ideal position geographically. You were talking about the potential to produce food. Colombia and Brazil are among the 4 countries in the world that have more potential for producing food for the future. We have solar power, we have wind for wind power, we have everything, but we need to integrate with the rest of the region. And this is something that worries me very much. Latin America has not been so disintegrated in the history of Latin America as we are now. Everybody's fighting with everybody else. And if we don't have a common denominator by ourselves, it's going to be very difficult to succeed. When we have an example of successful integration with President Calderon, we created something called the Pacific Alliance, which was the most successful integration process in a very short period of time. Why was it so successful? Because we decided that the private sector would be sort of the engine of the integration, the presidents will simply say yes or no. And that became very successful. But because of ideology, the Pacific Alliance was frozen. I think that something of that sort is needed right now, and I think that the initiative of President Lula, for example, to start promoting integration in infrastructure, is an extremely important and necessary condition for the region and every country within the region to be successful.
President Quiroga.
Thank you, Richard. I would say the importance of my country, Bolivia, just look at the map. We're the heart of South America. How would you like to live without your heart? We're in the midst of South America. We're part of the 3 river basins, the Amazon, the Platense, the Andina River Basin, landlocked, unfortunately. But our potential is great in the 21st century of the digital world and the AI world, not only because of my country, but the region that we're part of. Beautiful South America has great lungs, the Amazon basin, great potential in hydro because of the mountains that come down, and we can generate a lot of hydro renewable power. And we have the legs that the 21st century needs, the mobility for information and people that is going to be based more and more on lithium every day that goes by. Richard, if I go back to my room, I have 9 devices with lithium batteries. I got to travel with a spider web of rechargers for all those, and the cars are coming, and we can go to that world if we seize the moment of the digital lithium world and AI. The world is concerned, and Europe just slapped high tariffs on China. US has almost banned Chinese cars. China is dominating this for a simple reason. Inside this lithium battery is like a tennis match. On one side you have cobalt, nickel, manganese, that's one racket. The other side is Djokovic with graphite. And the lithium are the tennis balls that go back and forth on the charge and discharge. China is refining between 63 to 92% of each of those components that I just mentioned. So if you want to do nearshoring and you want to rely on batteries being manufactured, what we need to do is come to South America, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, over 60% of the world's lithium. Let's start building the batteries here and move up the value-added chain of the digital world that we're going to enter. And that, Richard, would be our entry ticket into the dramatic transformation that artificial intelligence is going to bring about. As a former IBM engineer, we lived through the 4 waves. First, PCs in the 80s, personal computers. You could work from home. Internet in the 90s. You could access information anywhere from home or work. 2007, the smartphones, the iPhones and the Androids. ChatGPT showed us what artificial intelligence was doing. I realized that no one in Brazil probably was paying attention because you were between, let me remember, Serbia, Switzerland, and Cameroon, I think, at the World Cup in Qatar, when ChatGPT came out. Argentina was playing Poland, and they needed to win that to become world champions eventually. Well, lo and behold, here comes ChatGPT, LLMs, we know what they mean. So NVIDIA chips and what have you, if we want to participate in that world and get the dramatic transformations. 2 points here, Richard, that are very important to understand. If you're an AI or you're a startup or you're investing, Latin America is the best place to do it because we have many young people that are very creative. Just check out the Instagram Reels or the number of TikToks. We produce a lot more reproducible content than the percentage of population we have because we're extremely creative. And unlike Europe or Finland, Switzerland, Japan, what have you, where there will be job displacements because of AI, in Latin America, AI will allow you, with the limited number of teachers, nurses, doctors, lawyers that we have, to be able to produce more, so there will be no resistance and no friction to the adoption of artificial intelligence that we can set up here. And the last point would be, we have to be able to have dependent, reliable energy and adequate latency on the telecom links to bring the AI servers and build them here. I don't think Brazil, Mexico, Colombia would ever accept doing health diagnostics, judicial verdicts. There'll be no corruption at least, but all those things in Shenzhen, China, or in Nevada, USA, we have to be able to bring that and leverage the lithium as our entry point to the digital AI world.
I have 2-3 more questions to ask, but I would like really to not have a lot of time, but so let's try to make some short answers. But still, we'd like to focus on the G20. President Quiroga, I will stay with you for now. As an engineer precisely, which advice would you give to the G20? You are a bridge builder, I know that in your whole career. Which advice would you give to the G20 leaders about international collaboration, cooperation? I think you are mentioning this absolute necessity of collaboration. Which advice would you give them?
One is we should move on trade with the ones that are willing. Speaking of coalition with the willing, which is a term that was used for war, we should move on trade with the ones that are willing to move on trade in the South. And I like this map because it shows you the trans-South Atlantic to the Gulf states and the Pacific, and the North is kind of squeezed in. So let us not wait for Europe or the US to be able to engage on trade. Let's move on our own. Second is, if we're going to do that, let's practice what we preach. Let's not just ask for open free trade markets, but let's rejigger our internal trade arrangements. Mercosur has been around for a while. The only place that it truly works very well is in the front line of European soccer teams. Messi, Neymar, Suarez, they play well together. When we come down here, duties, tariffs, a little bit of cheating on the trade. So move on that. And finance, the last point. Finance, yes, the world went through COVID. Europe and US dumped a lot of money that created inflation. We do not have the government funds and the stable currency. We did not have them to save our airlines, our hotels. We suffered through that. We didn't have the health programs. And now on the bounce back, inflation has perked up, interest rates have gone up, and where is the funding that we need for balance of payments issues that we have in the region? So yes, if they're going to continue to talk about the World Bank and the IMF being run by somebody else, we have to find our own funding mechanisms that are long-term. And I think that is something that we should try to build on, either restructuring the way the international organizations work or develop our own funding systems to be more self-reliant for the region.
President Santos, I will not talk to you as a president, but as a peace Nobel laureate winner. Which advice would you give to the G20 leaders when we're talking about peace, which is a so important topic today?
Well, first of all, I would like to touch on what Jorge said about finance. We are confronting the most dangerous existential problem, which is what is happening with the climate and biodiversity, and that we cannot address if the financial institutions don't change and help the financing of the transition. And so President Lula, and we have spoken to President Lula, has a tremendous opportunity and responsibility to lead at this very moment a reform of the financial institutions. Otherwise, we will fail in our efforts to stop climate change, and we will all lose. So that is a very important priority. And we are living in a very, very dangerous world. We have existential problems with the risk of of a nuclear war, of course, climate change, AI, pandemics, and for that you need cooperation among countries. And to cooperate, you need to talk. Mandela used to say, I am a part of a group called the Elders, was founded by Nelson Mandela. He said, the most powerful weapon there is to sit down and talk. And the leaders of the world who can change what is happening don't talk to each other. And it's absolutely necessary for them to start communicating and seeing how we can cooperate, because time is running out. Last week, I was in Sao Paulo. A group of scientists, and Laura probably knows this better than I do, they said, we have 6 years to change the trend. Otherwise, the climate change will not be controlled. And that in the same event, people like Brazilian Carlos Nobre, the Amazon, my country is part of it, is about to go to the tipping point where if you cross that tipping point, you cannot recuperate the Amazon. So we need urgently the G20 countries, which are the most powerful countries, to act financially, but also politically.
President Chinchilla, precisely after we come back to President Hernandez, you're a climate advocate, and you always said that women also should play a big role on this climate justice. Which message, which advice will you give to world leaders in this perspective of climate change?
Your question related to the same
Yeah,
G20 agenda?
Absolutely,
looking
absolutely.
forward?
Which advice will you give to the G20
Yes.
leaders?
Well, I think there is a unique opportunity because we have had countries from the Global South with the presidency of the G20 for 4 years in a row, Indonesia, India, Brazil, and then South Africa. So I think this is the time when they should try to speak with a unified voice in favor of the agenda of the Global South. And it has to do, number one, with climate change. And I imagine that Felipe can add much more about this issue. But we need desperately to get the financial resources to create the fund that is needed for compensation, etc. And secondly is what they already mentioned is the debt. Right now we have more than 50 countries in third world developing countries that are about to default. Some of them are already in default. So that is something else. And finally, I would say the reform we are looking for in changing the structure of the multilateral system. I will say that those three issues.
President Hernandez, you are always talking about the Global South. How can we address this issue of the Global South with the G20? What would be your message? What would be your advice about having more inclusivity with the Global South?
Me ha tocado participar en 4 G20s.
I've been to 4 G20s, and the truth is that
En el G20 se ve claramente
in
la
the
diferencia que hay entre
G20 you
demandas
see
del sur
clearly
y las demandas
the differences between the demands from the south and from the
del
north,
patéticamente.
and you
la
can see
diferencia.
that very specifically.
Ahora, acá se hablaron de muchas cosas.
We talked many things that are very important
Nosotros
here.
estamos
We
viviendo
talked
en un
about
mundo
we're living
que
in a world that
definitivamente está
definitely
cambiando.
is changing.
Definitivamente está.
Definitely, it's changing.
La aparición de China ha
The
hecho
appearance of
cambiar
China
drásticamente
made a huge
el sistema
change
global. O
in
sea,
the
hay que ser
global
muy necio para
reality.
no darse cuenta que la
So
irrupción de
you
China
have
y
to
los
be
BRICS,
really
que hoy representan al 44% de la
blindsided
humanidad,
not to see
y
that
más de 30%
China
del
represents
PBI, vino a
more than
reemplazar el
30
poder que
points of
resignificó
the
siempre el G7.
GDP
Hay que
global-wise.
ser muy necio para no darse cuenta
So you have
que ayer Arabia
to be
Saudita
very stubborn not to realize
decidió
that yesterday
terminar con el contrato
Saudi
que tenía, o
Arabia
el pacto que tenía con los Estados Unidos
finished the
para
pact
que
that it
el
had
petróleo
with the
siga
United States
cotizándose y vendiéndose en
for
dólares
the
y
oil
permitir
to
que se venda en
be
cualquier moneda y cotice en cualquier moneda. Y
sell
termina
in
con aquello
dollars,
que Nixon había inventado, que eran los
indexed in dollars,
petrodólares.
and they finished what
Ustedes no piensan que
Nixon
el mundo está
invented, which
cambiando.
was the petrodollars.
Está cambiando mucho. La
You don't think
geopolítica
that the
mundial
world is
está
changing? It's
cambiando
changing
mucho.
too much. The
Y en
geopolitical
esa
is changing
geopolítica, el
so
problema de la
much.
guerra
And the
que
problem with the
nosotros
war
tenemos
that we have
como consecuencia de la
as
invasión rusa
a
a
consequence
Ucrania,
of the
pero que
Russia
también
invasion
la
to
guerra que
Ukraine,
vive hoy
and
que
also
se ha desatado
the
en Medio
war
Oriente con
in the
Israel
Middle East with Israel
y Palestina
and
en
Palestine,
territorio israelí
in
y palestino a partir
Israeli-Palestine
de ese
territory,
acto terrorista espantoso que
from
hizo
that
Hamas,
beginning of the
ha
horrible
puesto
act,
en tela de
terrorist
juicio
act
todo el
from
orden
Hamas,
mundial y toda la tranquilidad mundial.
and that disrupted the peace
Y en los
in the
tiempos que
world.
vivimos, después
And
de haber
in
vivido
the
una
era that we
pandemia
live,
que se
after
llevó 15
a
millones de vidas,
pandemic in
la
which
segunda causa
15
de muerte
million
después de la
lives were
Segunda Guerra
taken,
Mundial
the second biggest number after the World War II.
Ahora, el sur
We
global,
have to understand
todo
that things
eso
are
Europa
changing,
dice,
but the South Global
todo esto lo padece.
is sickened of all this,
Yo
and it
sumaría
gets
otro
sick
tema
of
más
all this. And I'd say something else
se planteó recién.
that was talked about here, that
Miren lo que acaba de pasar
look
en la
at
Unión Europea.
what happened at the European
¿Cuántos
Union.
partidos de extrema derecha
How
han
many
ganado que son
extreme
negacionistas del
right
cambio
parties
climático?
that deny the climate
Negacionistas del
change,
cambio climático.
that completely
¿Y alguien
deny
puede seguir
climate
creyendo
change?
que el
And
cambio
can you
climático
still
no es un
think that the
problema
climate change is not a problem,
enorme para la
huge
humanidad?
problem for humanity?
¿Alguien puede seguir creyendo que
Can you
preservar
still think that
la
preserving
Amazonia
the
no es un
Amazon
problema
is
central,
not a
son los
central
pulmones del
problem?
mundo?
Those are the
Los
lungs
pulmones
of the
del mundo
world.
están
The lungs
precisamente
of the
en
world
América del Sur y en
are
África.
precisely in South Africa, I'm sorry, and in South America,
Y ahora están ganando los que
in
niegan
Brazil. And
la
now
crisis climática.
the ones that are winning are the ones that are denying
Esos
the
son los
climate
problemas que
change.
tenemos.
These are the problems that we
El
have.
otro problema que tenemos
The other
es
problem
el
that
que
we
acaba
have is
de mencionar Laura, el
what
problema de la
Laura
deuda.
just mentioned, the
Y eso
debt
en verdad
problem.
lo que me
And
lleva es
it's
a
a problem
reflexionar
that
sobre
made me
si
think
siguen
about
funcionando
if
adecuadamente las
we,
instituciones
the
que
institutions
se crearon
continue to
después de la
function
Segunda Guerra
properly, the ones
Si las
that were
Naciones
created after
Unidas
the
es
World War
capaz de
II.
parar
If
una
the United
guerra,
Nations
no es
is
capaz.
capable of ending
Si
a
las
war,
Naciones
no,
Unidas
the United
puede
Nations is not capable of
proteger a
ending
la
a war.
humanidad en el caso de
If
una
the United
pandemia,
States
no
is
ha sido capaz.
has a possibility of
Preguntarnos al
caring
Fondo
for
Monetario Internacional,
the
en verdad
society
sigue siendo
through a pandemic, no, it was
prestar
not possible.
instancia para los países que lo necesitan.
So,
Falso.
can the United Nations help financially countries that need? No, that's false. And to see how false it
Los
is,
países más endeudados
the countries that
pagan
have the
una
bigger
tasa
debt
y una
pay
sobretasa
taxes
porque le han
and an
prestado más de lo que
overtax
correspondía.
with
Eso le
overrates
pasa
because they've
en América,
been loaned more than
Argentina,
it was
Ecuador, a
correspondent.
Barbados.
In Argentina,
Pero
Ecuador,
¿saben a
and that
quién
happened
pasa
to
también?
Barbados, but it also happens to
Ucrania.
Ukraine.
Explíquenme cómo es
Explain to me
ese sistema por el
how
cual
this system
a
in which
Ucrania le endeudan,
Ukraine
la endeudan,
gets in
le
debt,
prestan plata del Fondo
they
Monetario,
they loan them from the monetary fund,
y además
they loan them money, and they charge them the rates and the over rates.
para que la
And
guerra
at the
continúe.
end, they will provide
¿Cómo es
all
ese
the military necessary so that the
nosotros
war
no nos damos cuenta
continues. So what
de
are
la
we talking about here in
desigualdad
the
en
world?
el
If you don't
mundo,
realize
mira, el hemisferio
how
sur
unbalanced and unequal the world is, the global
las
south is
herramientas
going to
para hacer
suffer
frente
too
son
much
mucho
because the
menores.
tools that we
Mucho
have are
en un mundo, insisto,
in less number than
donde
what's necessary. In a word that I insist,
personas o 11
11
instituciones
institutions
concentran el
concentrate
40%
40%
del PIB global.
of
Thank you,
the global
President
GDP.
Calderon.
Yeah, but
And I have one more
Thank
question
you,
also,
President
where you will
Calderon.
comment. The advice you will give also
The
at the
advice
same time,
that
not only to the
you will
G20,
give not only
but
to
to
the
the new
G20,
president
but to the
of
new
Mexico
president
as
of
the first
Mexico, Mr.
woman
Calderon,
elected
what
who
would
will
it be,
join the
the
G20?
president elected that we will
President Shevchenko,
join
which advice will you give her?
the G20? So what would you tell him?
well, let me go first about the G20. One is G20, climate change, Latin America. I believe it is important to concentrate all the efforts to establish one price of ton of carbon. Latin America can reduce carbon emission, can sequestrate carbon emissions, and we need to establish an objective parameter to do that. If the government of Brazil or Bolivia or Colombia or Peru can recover the Amazon, if they, through natural ways, grow the rainforest to recover and sequestrate carbon, G20 and the powerful nation can pay one amount of money for each ton of carbon that can be sequestrated. That's gonna, if you are a businessman in renewable energy, in massive transportation system with sustainability, you can receive a payment for that. We need to focus on economic incentives to reduce carbon emission and fighting climate change beyond the speeches, beyond the feelings, beyond the emotions. Pragmatical solution which implies economic incentives with money, clear money, and we need to fight the false idea that tackling climate change implies to fail or to stop global development or economic growth. It's a false dilemma. You can get growth And also you can tackle climate change, but we need to align the economic incentives. And regarding your questions, let me switch to Spanish because it's quite politically sensitive. I want to be careful with that, but uno, tiene que resistir la tentación del autoritarismo.
I'm going to say it in Spanish. You have to resist the totalitarianism idea. South America and Latin America has not resisted yet this possibility. And the president of Mexico as a leader, he has united Mexico. Mexico's story has been failure since the United States invasion, when we as Mexicans divide ourselves. So the next president has to unify the Mexicans, because we are the same people that have the same land, that we love the same flag, and we want the same prosperous future to everyone, no matter what our differences are. The future and our prosperity are not in natural resources, in all these beautiful landscapes. The future is in the right of state, rule of law, and the main stone is the judicial court system. To explode that and to take it down is to explode the future of Mexico. No one will believe in the future of Mexico as investors if you don't have legal assurance of if there is no legal system that will protect your investment. We need in Mexico to build this state of rights and democratic institutions being protected, respecting all the processes, and not making a fraud out of the law to give a higher representation for a specific party, and facing with stronger institutions the elephant in the room, which is narco traffic, drug traffic, and the organized crime. So we need strong institutions of fiscals, of the police, that will be a safe environment for the future that I desire this for Mexico and for Latin America.
Last question, 50 seconds to answer. Because we are watched and we are supported by so many youth people. If you have, each of you, one advice to give to a young or youth person, what will be? Let's end on a positive note. President Quiroga, one advice.
I don't want to take it so far as to say, if you don't live to serve, you don't serve to live. But I would encourage people, no matter how well you do in life, to dedicate a part of it to public service in a region that sorely needs it. Nothing is as gratifying, nothing contributes more than doing public service for a chunk of your life. It'll do wonders for yourself and for your country.
Prince Santos.
When I was very young, I went to the Navy, and they taught me how to sail. And they taught me that you need to know where you want to go if you want to be a good sailor. But they told me that's good for you in your personal life, in your family, in your business, and in government. Have a port of destiny. And I would say to the young people, choose your port of destiny and never lose hope. If you don't lose hope, you will fight for your port of destiny. And we need you, the young people right now, because they are the ones who can move the leaders to take the correct decisions.
Thank you. Prince Fernández.
En verdad, lo primero que tendría que...
Well, the truth is that the first thing is that I would have to think is what happened to my generation that disconnected so much from the young. I think that really we have a problem connecting to them to manage a logic and language.
Y actitudes diferentes. Y la primera pregunta me la hago yo, ¿no? No sé cuántos consejos puedo darle a los jóvenes no captando adecuadamente lo que los jóvenes
And adequately, it's important what the youth needs and what the youth thinks is something that is important for us to connect. What I desire in the youth is to have this possibility of facing your issues, dealing with them with resilience, and there's nothing more noble than the act of politics to give value to the politics that had been so mistreated in the last years, so mistreated, to give value to democracy, so mistreated in the last years, and that the youth understand that this is the best road to take. To be honest, I would like for this to happen, but I think that the biggest problem that we have as a generation is that it costs us a great deal to find what's the speech, the more precise way to reach the youth.
Spanish.
Please, of course.
I would like to say my final words in Spanish. I'd say that the part of this moment, this era, has to do with the phenomenon of the post-truth. And that generated a disruptive change, absolutely. In the past, we had to recognize that it was easier to move in one direction because we would accept as truth facts, and now it's not like this. So my main suggestion is be critical, question the information that you have access to, and try always to look for the qualifying sources, attend to the science, and try to make your decisions based on right information.
Prince Calderon.
Well,
Presidente Calderon?
it's quite difficult to make an advice, but I believe
Difficult.
thinking about the young man I used to be. Have a dream. Have an honest motive in your life and embrace it and fight for it with all your forces. Believe in something. You can believe, I don't care, you can believe in God, you can believe in nature, you can believe in humankind, whatever. Have a dream and fight for it with all your forces. Be congruent, be honest. Give your life some kind of sense and high purposes. And small advice also, but be a politician, an honest one. If you don't like the current politicians, no offense to anyone here, but if you don't like this, be yourself a politician. Like Mahatma Gandhi used to say, be the change you want to see. That's my advice.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our exceptional leaders. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for being with us. Thank you very much. Thank you.